Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today we are taking a look at this wonderful article from Screenrant, basically titled Movie Box Office Numbers Will Never Be the Same. The global coronavirus pandemic rocked the theatrical box office as movies were delayed and theaters closed. Here's why it will never fully recover. Now, let's actually see if they actually go into why the theaters won't recover, or if they're just going to blame it, or if they're just going to blame COVID the entire time because everything was COVID's fault. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's actually dive into this. The box office is roaring back in 2021 thanks to movies like Fast and Furious 9 and Black Widow, but the post-pandemic box office will never be the same as it was before coronavirus hit the world in 2020. While COVID-19 wasn't friendly to many industries, it was especially rough on theaters, and I will give them right off the bat. You know, really, movie theaters, restaurants, it was rough on them. Thanks to a combination of movie delays, capacity restrictions, public health caution, and a variety of other factors, theaters came to a grinding halt, posting the lowest box office in decades, a blow the industry may never fully recover from. And then they go into, fortunately, with vaccines available and infection rates decreasing in most areas, theaters are opening back up, big movies are releasing, and people are comfortable returning to the public. So a strong recovery is underway. Box office results aren't comparable to pre-pandemic levels and not even to each other yet, really, since so few big movies have been released post-pandemic, making it hard to compare with such a small sample. That is true. You only really had Fast and Furious 9 and Black Widow thus far were your biggest movies. There may have been one or two others that I'm, blanking out on. The situation is also still evolving, creating different circumstances for each release. Even so, there are box office wins to be reported, which is a good sign at a strong early recovery. Still, the damage done to theaters, industry changes in response to the pandemic, and a higher level of concern and awareness about public spaces means a full box office recovery doesn't seem likely. Theaters and the theatrical experience will likely survive, but considering theater attendance has already been declining for almost 20 years, thank fucking God, somebody actually acknowledges this. Considering theater attendance had already been declining for almost 20 years. That is true. Theater attendance has been going down since around 1999 to 2000. And most people talking about preserving the theatrical experience and, all this stuff. Oh, theaters are going to survive because it's the best way to watch the movie. They will never, ever acknowledge that the movie theater's problems actually stem back as far back as 20 years. COVID didn't necessarily help the situation, but it didn't harm it either. It didn't help. COVID didn't. What am I trying to say? COVID didn't help the situation, but it also didn't create the problems. Is what I ultimately meant to say. But continuing on, 2019 box office numbers were always going to be hard to reach again, even if coronavirus never happened. So let's go. They make three separate points in the article. We're going to go to point number one, and that is box office measurement never made sense. Now, I'm going to read their full argument, and then if there's anything to debunk, we will debunk it, obviously. The box office has always been used as a sort of measurement for the success of a movie, but it was always a flawed measuring stick. Well, I can see where their argument is, but but we don't have another way to objectively measure success other than how it performed in the market. A movie that was shot on a budget of $20 million that made $200 million would be considered a success. That was the only thing that we had. Box office records are interesting anecdotally, but don't hold much relevance when any mathematical scrutiny is applied. Factors like inflation, that is true. A lot of people never adjust the numbers for inflation. Marketing spend, a lot of the marketing budgets typically get hidden, so we don't truly know how much studios spend on marketing their big movies. Population changes and more already made year-over-year comparisons fairly moot. Adjusting for inflation seems like an easy fix, but changes in ticket prices don't make those numbers fair either. At least Screenrant is acknowledging it, that the average ticket price has gone up. So a movie that made $1 billion in 2019 is not the same thing as Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, crossing the $1 billion mark, Because back in 1999, it took a lot more people to go see the movie in order for a movie to cross the $1 billion mark. Nowadays, you don't need as many people to hit that same milestone. Now that the average ticket price is around $9 to $10 today, I don't remember how much it was back in the 1990s, but I can tell you, I remember going to the movie theaters back in the mid to late 2000s, and I never spent more than $5 on a matinee. Now, if you want to go to a matinee, it's going to cost you about $7 to $8 depending on where you go. But getting back to the article, even comparing the number of tickets sold isn't relevant due to expanding markets. That is true, particularly with the growing international box office, which now typically accounts for most of the box office hauls from blockbusters. And keep in mind, at the international box office, movie studios don't retain as much money as they do from the domestic market. The safe assumption is what the international gross is, they lose 60% of it. They only net 40% of the international box office gross, while domestically, they will net anywhere between 50 and 60% depending on the week. Besides that, box office occupies a weird place in the movie conversation. It only has a tangential reference to movie quality and isn't even the full picture when it comes to monetizing a movie. They're not wrong when they compare it to movie quality, because there have been a shit ton of bad movies that have made over $1 billion. And if you don't believe me, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. Probably the worst entry in the Pirates of the Caribbean series, but guess what? It was still profitable. It still made over $1 billion. I'm trying to think. Oh, Fast and Furious 9 recently, and now I personally haven't seen that movie, but I've heard it is absolute crap, even for a Fast and Furious movie. But it's still making buku bucks. So don't believe if a movie grosses a shit ton of money, that is not a measurement of quality, and they're not wrong about that. But they continue to go on. Box office is split up between the studio, financiers, and exhibitors, and product/brand deals, merchandise, and the home market are all big impacts on the success of a movie. While box office has a place in the conversation about industry health, its use as a part of the weekly horse race between new releases never made any sense. But hard data is easier to grasp than more abstract aspects of movies. They're not wrong. And studios love to hype up big numbers in marketing as a form of social proof. And they even do that with Rotten Tomatoes score. Oh, this movie was certified fresh. It has a perfect 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Blah, 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 blah. It's all marketing. As the popularity of streaming grows, the ability to use box office as a comparison metric between all current releases is diminished, hopefully leading to more discussions of quality instead of simple relative market performance of a given movie. That's basically their entire argument for box office measurement never made any sense. Now let's get into their second argument, which is something we already touched on, that theater attendance was already dropping. And again, I have to give credit where credit is due because they are at least acknowledging this. One major box office factor to remember is theatrical attendance was already in decline long before the pandemic hit. The box office was posting bigger and bigger revenues each year due to higher ticket prices. Yes, because, while the attendance was falling, the ticket prices were rising. Yeah, but overall attendance was always falling, and ticket prices can't increase to cover the difference forever. That's true. You can't keep going up and up and up and up and up, because the moment that you increase the ticket prices, theater attendance is still going to go down irregardless, and at some point you are going to hit the law of diminished returns. Especially with the growing competition of streaming. The pandemic likely accelerated that decline in a massive way. Yes, I even alluded to this. COVID did not help movie theater situation, but it did not create the problems that they're going through. The pandemic likely accelerated that decline in a massive way, such that a full recovery, which was never likely to hit pre-pandemic levels in the first place, would likely mean getting back to the appropriate places on the same pre-pandemic downward trajectory. Moviegoers who are losing interest in theater attendance are only going to be less enthusiastic after the pandemic, but with permanent theater closures and the trend towards more premium seating and therefore reduced capacity, yes, that was a really, really dumb move that they did. Hey, let's eliminate at least 50% of our seating but and jack up the ticket prices to like $20 a seat, therefore making even less money than if we just kept the regular seating and sold out a packed house. There are also a number of additional factors naturally lowering the ceiling on movie theater attendance. Okay, point number 3. Post-pandemic box office will never be comparable to pre-pandemic. So this is how the article ends. The pandemic forced Hollywood, the theatrical industry, and audiences to make some rapid structural and behavioral differences, resulting in an environment that precludes comparisons between the two eras. Even if we return to a regularly seeing billion-dollar blockbuster... Hold on, I misread that. Even if we return to regularly seeing billion-dollar blockbusters, the circumstances surrounding that kind of haul will be so drastically different, it'll be impossible to determine how much more that same title could have earned pre-pandemic. And that's true. You know, you have shifting market forces. For example, both Fast and Furious 9 and Black Widow's box office performance is better than some previous movies and their respective franchises, so at a casual glance, they could be right where they should be. Black Widow is performing better domestically than Ant-Man and the Wasp was at this point, and it's run 2018. And see, here is my problem with statistics, because you can cherry pick statistics to make anything look good. So it's like Black Widow is performing better domestically than Ant-Man and the Wasp, despite the fact that the Ant-Man movies, Ant-Man and the Wasp, were always like the lowest. I think they were the lowest grossing entries in the MCU. So it's always really easy to compare something to the lowest to the lowest grossing and say, oh, at least it's better than that. But they acknowledge, but Black Widow is a bigger character, has a summer release date, and every movie since Ant-Man and the Wasp has crossed $1 billion globally, not to mention more structural changes in the industry we haven't seen the full impact of yet. Thanks to theater closures, a number of theatrical films saw streaming releases during the pandemic, resulting in a reduction in box office windows, meaning theatrical exclusivity will be shorter and movies will go to streaming sooner. This doesn't only suppress end-of-run ticket sales, admittedly a small portion of total gross, but also pushes more on-the-fence moviegoers closer to the wait-for-streaming crowd. I've been a part of that crowd ever since about 2010, when they initially lowered the release window from 6 months to 3 months. It's like, I'll just wait for the movie to come out on DVD to see it. I don't need to rush out to the theater to go there. Streaming revenue was already slated to surpass box office revenue before the pandemic, and the shorter window shifts that line even more. Post-pandemic box office numbers may not mean much for a while until the industry settles on a new normal, which may make it hard to evaluate box office results since there's too many external factors impacting every movie in different ways. If there's a bright side to all this, though, maybe it'll help create discussions about movies that look at more than commercial merits before applying any labels of failure or success. And that's how the article ends. But yes, the fact is, guys, movie theaters were already struggling long before this. And I was making this point even going back into 2020 that, you know, theater attendance was already on the decline. Then you saw the rise in premium seating, which just drove the ticket prices up even higher, which means more people aren't going. And then you had the really stupid, not assigned seating, but there's no other way to describe it. You know, I am all for the assigned seating if it's like a special screening. Like if it's a midnight showing and you buy your tickets in advance, yes, you know, then I'm all for the assigned seating. But I'm not going to honor the assigned seating going into a fucking matinee. And that really was the movie theater's problem, was that they're trying to market themselves more and more as a luxurious experience. You know, you are going to the theater instead of just sticking to what it was, which was basically, movies have always been the working man's medium, if you think about it. It's always been, movie tickets were always a lot cheaper than going to see a stage production. But the problem is they keep increasing it more and more and more. People are going to seek out the alternative options. And guys, that's pretty much all I got for you this time. And I know I've gone on a lot longer, but I think that this really needed to be said, that movie theaters were struggling a lot longer than people think. Yeah, COVID-19 didn't help the problem, but it didn't create all of their problems. It just exacerbated their already existing issues. And if you guys have been following me for a while, you know I am terrible at ending these, so I will just see you guys next time.